We have written extensively about Comey and Mueller's crimes, but this is the first time we are listing crimes they have committed under the protection of national security, which were, in fact, crimes against America. With this internet posting, we the people are officially charging them with these crimes, and we demand that military tribunals be set up to prosecute these traitors. After you read this, please make your own official charge to the appropriate authorities for those listed in this Citizen Intelligence Report. Make sure to send a copy to the Department of Justice in the White House. Please forward this link through your social media networks to wake up other patriots. Many of these crimes have been reported on extensively by us. Comey spies Mueller's lies. When you say the Mueller investigation, please remember it is actually the Comey investigation to impeach, as it was called by Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, two of the key FBI members of a team that Comey led through Bill Priestap's counterintelligence department, which is protected by a national security blanket that allows them to conduct top-secret operations. From July 2016 on to this day, Trump has been under attack from the small group, the Trump Operation, the Secret Society, the investigation to impeach, the Carter Page dossier group, the George Papadopoulos FBI counterintelligence operation, as it was called by Peter and Lisa. In the 372 of the 50,000 text messages released so far, Peter and Lisa went on to lead the Mueller investigation, which was also aided and supported by other members of the investigation to impeach, which essentially became the group we call the leaders of the coup d'etat, or the treasonous traitors. Any name you give this group, it is still a witch hunt that has turned into a George Soros-style regime change. Most people don't understand that the Mueller investigation to overthrow a sitting president is slowing down because Mueller and Comey have been so desperate to cover their criminal trails that they have made horribly stupid mistakes all along the path to stop Trump at any cost. Now, their continuing efforts have become treason against the United States of America. This is a very large conspiracy, the like of which America has never seen before. When we simply list the criminals that have already been fingered, The seeming just outcome would place two past presidents in jail. This is clearly evident in Susan Rice's text message discovered and released by the Senator Grassley that shows Susan writing an alibi for herself that also clearly shows that Obama, Biden, Sally Yates, and Susan herself were all fully aware that Comey was conducting a coordinated attack against Trump with the fake Christopher Steele dossier. They all knew that the dossier was paid for by John Podesta in the Democratic National Committee, DNC, and Hillary Clinton's victory campaign through Mark Elias to Fusion GPS. In December of 2015, when the Democratic National Committee's server and emails were breached not hacked, John Podesta realized what was inside of those messages and he knew he needed an alibi. WikiLeaks shows the Hillary campaign had done an assessment of her weak points and the one that would take her down was her connection to the Russians, especially her criminal participation in Uranium One. Thus, the DNC made a plan that involved James Comey running a multi-pronged attack against Trump, accusing Trump of being in collusion with Putin.
I'm walking by the place
Personally and demonstrating that Putin is interfering in the presidential election to help Trump win. The bigger the lie, the easier it is to believe it. We have seen this happen with the FBI undercover agent who busted the Uranium One criminal takeover of American uranium and the subsequent payoffs to Hillary and Bill. The scheme the DNC concocted was amazingly bold and filled with disinformation and spin. James Comey threw every resource he had available to him at the FBI to the smear campaign against Trump. Here is a list of crimes Comey committed in his attempt to help Hillary and Podesta win the White House and continue the Obama dismantling and fleecing of America. 1. Around December 15, 2016, Comey responses to Podesta and Hillary and joins the DNC efforts to create a cover story for both the recent DNC server and email breaches and the need to create a narrative that covers Hillary's Russian associations and the Uranium One payoffs. Remember that Comey and Mueller are part of the Uranium One criminal assault on American uranium resources. Mueller carried yellow-caked uranium to Putin for Hillary before Putin would agree to buy Uranium One through Rosatom. 2. The DNC, with the help of Alexandra Chalupa, decides to have her friend from the Atlantic Council, Dmitry Alperovich, come and place Russian hacking footprints in the DNC server to blame the hacking on Russians who are trying to support Trump. 3. Alexandra Chalupa offers to return to Ukraine and create a ledger that proves that Paul Manafort took $27 million in illegal payments for the work he did in Ukraine for Viktor Yanukovych when Manafort worked for him as a lobbyist. Podesta and Hillary knew that Roger Stone, Paul Manafort's partner in the most powerful lobbyist group in Washington, D.C., had already groomed Trump to become president, and they had to take out both Stone and Manafort and eventually did just that. 4. Comey creates the Russian dossier plan, Page dossier, which would utilize his longtime FBI undercover employee, Carter Page, as the fall guy who supposedly was indicated as the go-between for Trump and Putin. According to the Page dossier, Page will get paid money from a Russian oil company and Trump will be paid through Alpha Bank in Russian by Putin-friendly oligarchs who will also be implicated in election meddling that supports Trump and harms Hillary. 5. Comey targets Manafort in the Page dossier because Comey knows that Manafort has been under investigation by the FBI, CIA, ODNI and U.S. Treasury OIS since 2005, and it will be easy to use FBI resources to circle Trump through the already existing warrants being used to monitor Paul Manafort 24/7. 6. Comey gets a FISA warrant on Carter Page by using a FISA Title I warrant claiming that Carter Page is a known Russian spy. This gives Comey complete surveillance of the Trump team once Page joins the Trump team in January of 2016. Roger Stone and Manafort were on board with making Trump president from the beginning. Manafort is the president maker who ran the campaign financing for Ford, Reagan, and Bush Sr. and then successfully got Trump through the Electoral College vote when many thought Trump would not make it. Hillary used Podesta, the other president maker who runs the second most powerful lobbyist group in D.C., the Podesta Group, which collapsed under Mueller's investigation because Tony Podesta was found to be as guilty as Manafort and Gates. 7. Comey opens an extensive FBI investigation into Donald Trump and his father's backgrounds. This report was posted on the FBI site for a short time and it stated there was no dirt found on the Trump family. Kami struck out on this one and knew he had to take his game up a notch. 8. Kami calls in his rear guard. Good old Felix Sater, a criminal Russian. Kami has made an undercover agent long ago after Felix almost killed a person in a New York City barroom fight. Sater has been convicted multiple times since becoming an FBI stooge. Felix penetrated the Trump camp when Mueller first heard Trump might run in 2000 when Roger Stone and others encouraged him to do so. Felix brought Trump Russian investors for the Trump Soho Towers, and Felix has been foisting himself upon Trump ever since. Felix has been used repeatedly by Comey/Mueller over the years, though it doesn't seem to reach the news, nor has Felix been questioned by the Mueller investigation to impeach team. Felix Sater is the definition of Russian meddling in the election. 9. Comey had Felix Sater on June 9, 2016. Set up the fake opposition research meeting with Natalia Veselnitskaya, Renata Kmechin, Rob Goldstone, Ike Kavaladze, and the Trump team, including Manafort, through whose phone they surveilled the meeting. Comey worked with the State Department to let the Russians have a special visa because Natalia, Rob, and Renat were well-known Russian spies who were allowed into the country under false pretenses. This attempted entrapment of the Trump team by Comey was obvious because the text messages and content of the meeting was leaked to the press shortly after. Trump Jr. quickly sent out all of the texts and was transparent about the silly meeting, thus diffusing yet another Comey attack. 10. Comey had Felix Sater continue to involve the Trump team with anything Russian, including a trip to Moscow with 2 members of the Trump team to consider building a Trump Towers in Moscow, Georgia, and the Crimea. Nothing came of it. 11. Comey approached and paid Franklin Foer, from Slate News Agency, to supposedly discover by accident a direct line of communication between the Trump Towers and Alpha Bank in Russia that was supposedly sending money to Trump from 3 friends of Putin. Foer ran 2 articles as October surprises to take down Trump at the last minute of the election with proof Trump was in bed with Putin. This Trump Tower server was supposed to be the icing on the cake of the Page dossier, showing the big payoff mechanism. 12. On October 21, 2016, Comey gets the Page dossier under false pretenses, lies, and a complex set of conspiracies. The Page dossier is the insurance policy Strzok and Page text about that was the last resort to take Trump down and get Hillary elected. Comey came out immediately and debunked the Trump Tower server, saying it was probably an advertisement campaign ran by a company for Trump that works in Florida and has nothing to do with Trump. Comey had to do this because FOA released too much information and used too many IT experts who eventually said it was fake. Comey had to distance himself from the Trump Towers server because that part of his page dossier got proven to be a fraud. 13. The page dossier was never supposed to be published, and that is why Comey worked through the #1 propaganda group, Fusion GPS, a criminal cabal of ex-journalists used by the most corrupt people in the world. Comey had Glenn Simpson, one of the owners of Fusion, to work with Christopher Steele, the foreign agent ex-British spy who compiled the page dossier from numerous sources and came to America to brief CNN, Washington Post, New York Times, Mother Jones, and Yahoo News, all complicit in the conspiracy, on the fake contents of the dossier so they could run fake news stories. Steele testified in one on his 4 lawsuits concerning the dossier that it was only meant for the eyes of his clients. His client was John Podesta's DNC and Hillary's victory campaign through Perkins Coie and Mark Elias, all complicit in the conspiracy. The clients of Steele's page dossier at first claimed they knew nothing of the $12 million page dossier, which should be called the DNC dossier, or who paid for it. They perjured themselves in their testimony. When BuzzFeed, who was probably given a copy by John McCain, printed the page dossier, all hell broke loose and Comey lost control of all of his many fronts that were attacking Trump. Thus, Comey's conspiracy turned into a mess. All of the plans were poorly thought out and pathetically executed and were considered just a backup plan because they were all quite certain that Hillary would win. 14. Comey made sure the Sidney Blumenthal-inspired and Cody Shearer-created dossier, Shearer dossier, got included into the Christopher Steele page dossier. This Shearer dossier combined what Oher, Don's direct contact with Steele, got from his wife Nellie Oher's Fusion GPS opposition research into a Fusion GPS dossier of its own. Comey made sure Bruce Oher gave Steele a copy of the Fusion GPS dossier as well as the previous DNC opposition research they had done on Trump before December 2015, called the DNC server's Trump Oppositional Research folder, which was released by WikiLeaks. There was also the FBI research done on Trump in January 2016, which we have mentioned above. That FBI file and another file from John Brennan, the person who admits to first receiving intel about Trump and Putin. Some claim Brennan spent $100,000 as an initial payment of $1 million for Trump opposition research, which included an alleged video of Trump in a hotel room with prostitutes. No such tape ever surfaced. 15. Comey helped the DNC, Hillary, and Christopher Steele to create the page dossier and set the wheels in motion to create a number of situations to frame the Trump team with Russian connections, including the Trump Towers server, getting the Russian spy Vasyl Nitskaya and company into the country for the Trump team entrapment and framing, Carter Page infiltrating the Trump team, Alexandra Chalupa creating the Manafort fake ledger, Alperovich planning the Russian footprints in the DNC server, Andrew McCabe's release of M13 gang members and the death of Seth Rich, arresting Yevgeny Nikulin in Prague to set up Michael Cohen as bagman for Putin payoffs, FBI investigation of Trump and his father, Felix Sater's many attempts to frame the Trump team as Russian-friendly, among other. 16. Comey had Felix Sater, his Russian spy and undercover employee, accuse Michael D. Cohen, Trump's lawyer, of brokering a plan to lift sanctions from Russia in an attempt to make Cohen appear Putin-friendly so that Comey's page dossier could include references to Cohen. This letter about sanctions never existed, but Sater spoke to the press about it numerous times, trying to show that Cohen and he were ready to lift sanctions, the very phrase used to go after Michael Flynn, who also was under a Comey surveillance warrant covering his communications because of his association with Turkey's president and his frequent interviews on Russia Today, an American-based Russian news agency where Flynn was a guest. Flynn went to Russia for a dinner honoring RT and he never filed as an agent working for a foreign country. Flynn's consulting firm made the same mistake as Manafort and Gates and Tony Podesta by not filing. 17. When the leaks came out, leaks created by Comey, the Trump team made a copy of Michael Cohen's passport available to the news to demonstrate he had never been in Prague. Yevgeny Nikulin was conveniently arrested in Prague after being hunted for a long time because he had hacked Dropbox and LinkedIn. Comey's FBI team went to Prague twice to the prison to visit this hacker and offer him immunity in the witness protection program if he would admit to being the DNC hacker who was hacking to help Trump and harm Hillary directly for Vladimir Putin himself. Twice, Yevgeny turned the offer down and then reported the scam to the news and had the proof to show the FBI was in the prison twice. Eventually, Steele's page dossier names Alexei Gubarev as the DNC hacker, and now Gubarev is suing Steele in London and America. The Alpha Bank Russian oligarchs, Mikhail Friedman, Petr Van, German Khan are also suing Steele. 18. Comey engineered the entrapment and framing of George Papadopoulos, the most junior member of the Trump team who never even spoke with Trump, by enlisting a Russian agent named Joseph Rixey in London and again in Italy in March of 2016. This agent, who meets directly with Putin each year as part of the club he promised to get George into, the Valdai discussion group, also introduced George to the niece of Putin who drew George into an entrapment of Russian espionage. George reported these meetings to his contact with the Trump team, and that was the end of his association with the team. The Russian spies dangled the missing Clinton emails as bait for poor George. Of course, George got nothing but fired. Comey got a FISA Section 702 warrant on George in July of 2016. This was an FBI counterintelligence operation. George was not picked up and questioned until July 2017, 1 full year after the warrant allowed Comey to spy on the Trump team based upon the entrapment of George the Naive. This warrant started as an illegal spying on the Trump team and then was used to create the Mueller investigation to impeach on the continuing harassment of a sitting president. The FBI counterintelligence operation: Comey, McCabe, Priestap, Strezak, Page, Noer, Baker, Carlin, Rosenstein, Lynch, Yates, Rice, Obama, Biden, etc., was the same group that exonerated Hillary's email crimes, the Clinton Foundation crimes, the Hillary's Uranium One emolument clause crimes, the Hillary's pay-to-play State Department crimes, the Hamas email espionage, and much more that hasn't come to light. 19. Comey claims that the DNC is hacked in July 2016, and Dmitry Albarevich, a convicted Russian hacker turned FBI asset, discovers the supposed Russian hacker footprints, which in fact, he placed there when called by Alexandra Chalupa and Comey to analyze the breach in December 2015. 20. Comey creates another cover story for the DNC hacking by inventing Gulchiffer 2.0, who claimed to have hacked the DNC before the Russians got there. Dmitry and Gulchiffer 2.0 go through a public debate online, and Gulchiffer 2.0 releases hacked information to prove his point. These hacks were nothing more than a cheap trick of rewriting what WikiLeaks had already released. Gulchiffer then hacks the Democrats in Congress, DCCC, and George Soros's Open Society meetings, DC Leaks. None of the material released by Gulchiffer 2.0 is new or demonstrates Gulchiffer 2.0 was the hacker of the DNC. Comey claimed.
It's me, it's Mark, it's the, Kevin Systerman, Instagram, it's all of these people, understood this consciously, and we did it anyway.
That culture is missing here. So part of what we're trying to do to achieve those goals is take really big, audacious points of view on the world, and then train ourselves to be patient. And it's really, really hard. The entire society is set up to not be patient anymore. Consumer internet businesses are about exploiting psychology. And that is one where you want to fail fast because, people are unpredictable, and so we want to psychologically figure out how to manipulate you as fast as possible and then give you back that dopamine hit. We did that brilliantly at Facebook. Instagram has done it, WhatsApp has done it, Snapchat has done it, Twitter has done it. So there are great examples. WeChat is doing it. There are great examples of failing fast is the right path to exploiting psychology of mass populations of people. I feel tremendous guilt. I think we all knew in the back of our minds, even though we feigned this whole line of there probably aren't any really bad unintended consequences. I think in the back, deep recesses of our minds, we kind of knew something bad could happen. But I think the way we defined it was not like this.
Turn it off. That's what I would say. It's hard for young people now because they're hooked. They're addicted. If you don't think you're addicted, and I'm talking about anyone, from the highest to the lowest, if you don't think you're addicted, then see if you can turn it off for a week. It got quiet in here, didn't it? Didn't it get real quiet? It's a tool, so we should use it. God has blessed us with free will. Now it's free will magnified, free will on steroids. You're free to go in any direction you want. It will allow you, and it's not the enemy. It's just a reflection of our own free will. You know? And we all want to be liked. But now we want to be liked by 16 million. And will now, some of us, do anything to be liked. We used to do anything to be liked, but it was by the person in front of you. Now it's to be liked by 16 million people that you don't know. We have to ask ourselves, what is the long-term, if not the short-term effect of too much information?
So the context was I was at Stanford, and the dean asked me to speak to the MBA students. And in it, what I was talking about was, the question was, you know, what do you think the long-term effects of social media in general are? And unfortunately, what happened was, I think it's easy to characterize what I said just as a Facebook-specific thing, because I worked there and I was a key part of growing it. The reality of what I was...
Explain what you said at the time.
So what I said was, I think the tools that have been created today are starting to erode the social fabric of how society works. And what I meant by that is the following thing. Today we live in a world now where it is easy to confuse truth and popularity. And you can use money to amplify whatever you believe and get people to believe that what is popular is now truthful and what is not popular may not be truthful. You know, Joe and I, for example, we've been on the other side of climate for a long time, right? And the reality is now I can take money and I can use that through all of these social media systems that exist to hundreds of millions of people, and I can convince all of Joe's friends and everybody like him of my opinion in very subtle and small ways. And he can do the same to me. We can do that about vaccines. We can do that about gay rights. We can do that about bathroom laws. We can do that about Roy Moore. And so I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we live in a world where this is now possible? And
so it was about that, but just so I understand, was it, because I read and watched parts of what you were talking about, part of it seemed to me about the ability to pay to manipulate people's thoughts. The other seemed to me to be this sort of ADD society with which the sort of liking and everything else has created this sort of feedback loop that you compared to drugs.
We know for a fact that what all of these systems do, every single one, is it exploits our own natural tendencies in human beings to get and want feedback. And that feedback, chemically speaking, is the release of dopamine in your brain. And so what these feedback loops do, and they exist everywhere, in Call of Duty, in other video games, in social networking sites, they get you to react.
When Facebook was getting going, I had these people who would come up to me and they would say, you know, I'm not on social media. And I would say, okay, you know, you will be. And then they would say, no, I value my real life interactions. I value the moment. I value presence, and I value intimacy. And I would say, well, you're a conscientious objector. That's okay. You don't have to participate, but you know, we'll get you eventually. and like, I don't know if I really understood the consequences of what I was saying, because the unintended consequences of a network when it grows to 1 billion or 2 billion people, and it literally changes your relationship with society, with each other, with you know, it probably interferes with productivity in weird ways. God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains. You know, if the thought process that went into building these applications, Facebook being the first of them to really understand it, that thought process was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible. And that means that we need to sort of give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented on a photo or a post or whatever. And that's going to get you to contribute more content, and that's going to get you, you know, more likes and comments. I mean, it's a social validation feedback loop that it's like it's exactly the kind of thing that a hacker like myself would come up with, because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology.
It literally is a point now where I think we have created tools that are ripping apart the social fabric of how society works. That is truly where we are. And I would encourage all of you, as the future leaders of the world, to really internalize how important this is. If you feed the beast, that beast will destroy you. If you push back on it, we have a chance to control it and rein it in. And it is a point in time where people need to hard break from some of these tools and the things that you rely on. The short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops that we have created are destroying how society works. No civil discourse, no cooperation, misinformation, mistruth. And it's not an American problem. This is not about Russian ads. This is a global problem. So we're in a really bad state of affairs right now, in my opinion. It is eroding the core foundations of how people behave by and between each other. And I don't have a good solution. You know, my solution is I just don't use these tools anymore. I haven't for years. It's created huge tension with my friends, huge tensions in my social circles. If you look at, like, you know, My Facebook feed. I've posted maybe 2 times in 7 years. 3 times, 5 times. It's less than 10. And it's weird. I guess I kind of just innately didn't want to get programmed. And so I just tuned it out. But I didn't confront it. And now to see what's happening, it really bums me out. Like, think about, like, there were these examples where there was a hoax in WhatsApp where in some like village in India, people were like afraid that their kids were going to get kidnapped, etc. And then there were these lynchings that happened as a result, where people were like vigilante running around. They think they found the person, and I mean, seriously? Like, that's what we're dealing with. You know, imagine like when you take that to the extreme, where, you know, bad actors can now manipulate large swaths of people to do anything you want. It's a really, really bad state of affairs. And we compound the problem, right? We curate our lives around this perceived sense of perfection because we get rewarded in these short-term signals, hearts, likes, thumbs up, and we conflate that with value and we conflate it with truth. And instead what it really is fake, brittle popularity that's short-term and that leaves you even more, and admit it, vacant and empty before you did it. Because then it forces you into this vicious cycle where you're like, what's the next thing I need to do now? Because I need it back. Think about that compounded by 2 billion people. And then think about how people react then to the perceptions of others. It's really bad. So you're training your brain here, whether you think it or not, whether you know it or not, whether you acknowledge it or not. Acknowledge that these things where you're spending hours a day are rewiring your psychology and physiology in a way that now you have to use to go and figure out how to be productive in the commercial world. So if you don't change this, you are going to get the same behaviors over here. Change this. There's a reason why Steve Jobs was like anti-social media. I am telling you I'm not on these fucking apps. I'm not him by any stretch of the imagination. But I am proactively trying to rewire my brain chemistry to not be short-term focused. I'm telling you they're linked.
And I think that if you get too desensitized and you need it over and over and over again, then you become actually detached from the world in which you live.
You become callous, you become crude.
And you live in front of your screen.
But Chamath, let me ask you this, because the thing that I've been so concerned about is Facebook just announcing that you're going to be having some app that you can use when you're 7 to 13. I mean, it's one thing for us to be doing this, but to be hooking your kids on something that you're describing as a dopamine fix at that age, that's crazy.
So look, I think in the case of Facebook specifically, I think they have probably done more than any other company, quite honestly, to try to fix it because of all of the companies, and I've seen them all up close. They're the most, frankly, to be very blunt and honest, the best run and the most technically sophisticated.
But they're also emailing me if I haven't logged onto Facebook for a while saying, hey, did you see the post from so-and-so? Did you see the post from so-and-so? Trying to lure you back in. And again, we can make those decisions as adults, but as children, that is a different...
Well, I think the product, and I don't know it quite honestly in as much detail as I should, but I think the way that that product works, because of privacy laws in the United States, you actually have to get parental permission. The point, though, is, and what you're bringing up is, I think, is the most important thing. We all have never taken a step back and actually asked ourselves, how should we be interacting with these things now, 7 years into it? And what should we be expecting of the internet at large? Look, the reality may be the entire business model of the internet may be fundamentally somewhat broken, right? Because we allow ourselves to get interacted with in ways where we don't necessarily control the medium or the messenger.
And we are not putting up any barriers to ever give yourself any downtime from that either.
Exactly. And so it may mean that we all collectively need to figure out, not just individuals, but also the companies, also governments, quite honestly, how different business models need to exist so that we can actually divorce ourselves from how this stuff is
what goes on?
Tonight here, a warning about Facebook and what some believe it's doing to kids. The warning comes from 2 of the company's earliest executives. Carter Evans is following this.
We kind of knew something bad could happen.
Chamath Palihapitiya, a former Facebook executive once in charge of user growth, now says he has tremendous guilt about the social network he helped build.
We have created tools that are ripping apart the social fabric of how society works.
And it's influencing the next generation. Studies show 92% of teens go online daily, and 1 in 5 young people regularly wake up in the night to send or check messages on social media.
People need to hard break from some of these tools and the things that you rely on. The short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops that we have created are destroying how society works. No civil discourse, no cooperation, misinformation, mistruth. Bad actors can now manipulate large swaths of people to do anything you want.
He's not the only social media executive blowing the whistle. Former Facebook President Sean Parker recently said the initial goal was to get people hooked.
You're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. The inventors, creators understood this consciously, and we did it anyway.
We have to hold the tech industry accountable.
Jim Steyer is founder of Common Sense Media.
They, in many cases, have ignored the consequences, some of the downsides of some of the innovations they brought to our society.
You don't realize it, but you are being programmed. It was unintentional, but now you got to decide how much you're willing to give up.
When Facebook was getting going, I had these people who would come up to me and they would say, you know, I'm not on social media. And I would say, okay, you know, you will be.
On the faculties of colleges and universities.
Greetings world. We are going to bring to the world's attention something put out some years ago that at the time he considered it to be the informational weapon to defeat the fate that's in store for us all. It recently resurfaced and made its rounds across the internet, and we are going to present it again here. A man named Myron Fagan went to great lengths to expose a plot that began in 1760. A plan set forth by an elite few and that has been well underway ever since. A plan for a one-world government. They have been called many names, but most popularly, the Illuminati. Before you simply scoff at this idea, you may want to hear this. The information here is well documented and contains within many references. Simply put, brushing this off as mere conspiracy could in fact cost the entire human race their collective freedom or future freedom, as well as millions if not billions of lives, as we are nearing the final stages of this agenda. Keep in mind the following audio from 1967, it was a year charged with racial tensions and the height of the civil rights movement, and as such, Certain racial terms are used to identify groups of people. Understand that Anonymous only believes in and recognizes one race, the human race. Nonetheless, the man's research is vitally important. We wouldn't present it if we didn't believe it to be as such. Now then, on to the audio.
The question of how and why the United Nations is the crux of the great conspiracy to destroy the sovereignty of the United States and the enslavement of the American people within a UN one-world dictatorship is a complete and unknown mystery to the vast majority of the American people. The reason for this unawareness of the frightening danger to our country and to the entire free world is simple. The masterminds behind this great conspiracy have absolute control of all of our mass communications media, especially television, the radio, the press, and Hollywood. We all know that our State Department, the Pentagon, and the White House have brazenly proclaimed that they have the right and the power to manage the news, to tell us not the truth, but what they want us to believe. They have seized that power on orders from their masters of the great conspiracy. And the objective is to brainwash the people into accepting the phony peace bait to transform the United States into an enslaved unit of the United Nations one world government. First of all, bear in mind that the so-called UN police action in Korea, fought by the United States, in which 150,000 of our sons were murdered and maimed, was part of the plot, just as the undeclared by Congress war in Vietnam, in which our sons are dying, is part of the plot, just as the plot against Rhodesia and South Africa, in which our sons will be dying, is part of the UN plot. However, the vitally important thing for all Americans, all you mothers of the boys who died in Korea and are now dying in Vietnam, to know is that our so-called leaders in Washington, whom we elected to safeguard our nation and our Constitution, are the betrayers, and that behind them are a comparatively small group of men whose sole objective is to enslave the whole world of humanity in their satanic plot of one world government. Now, in order to give you a very clear picture of this satanic plot, I will go back to its beginning, clear back in the middle of the 18th century, and name the men who put that plot into action, and then bring you down to the present, today's status of that plot. Now, as a matter of further intelligence, a term used by the FBI, let me clarify the meaning of the expression, "He is a liberal." The enemy, meaning the one-world conspirators, have seized upon that word liberal as a cover-up for their activities. It sounds so innocent and so humanitarian to be liberal. Well, make sure that the person who calls himself a liberal or is described as a liberal is not in truth a red. Now then, this satanic plot was launched back in the 1760s when it first came into existence under the name of the Illuminati. This Illuminati was organized by one Adam Weishaupt, born a Jew, who was converted to Catholicism and became a Catholic priest, and then, at the behest of the then newly organized House of Rothschild, defected and organized the Illuminati. Naturally, the Rothschilds financed that operation. And every war since then, beginning with the French Revolution, has been promoted by the Illuminati operating under various names and guises. I say under various names and guises because after the Illuminati was exposed and became too notorious, Weishaupt and his co-conspirators began to operate under various other names. In the United States, immediately after World War I, they set up what they called the Council on Foreign Relations, commonly referred to as the CFR. And this CFR is actually the Illuminati in the United States. And its hierarchy, the masterminds in control of the CFR, to a very great extent, are the descendants of the original Illuminati conspirators. But to conceal that fact, most of them changed their original family names to American-sounding names. For example, the true name of the Dillons, Clarence and Douglas Dillon, once Secretary of the U.S. Treasury Department, is Lepowski. I'll come back to all this later. There is a similar establishment of the Illuminati in England, operating under the name of the British Institute of International Affairs. There are similar secret Illuminati organizations in France, Germany, and other nations operating under different names. And all these organizations, including the CFR, continuously set up numerous subsidiary or front organizations that are infiltrated into every phase of the various nations' affairs. But at all times, the operations of these organizations were and are masterminded and controlled by the internationalist bankers, who in turn were and are controlled by the Rothschilds. The details of how they accomplished the setting up of the CFR in the United States, as also in the other nations, are far too voluminous to be described in this dissertation. But you can find it complete in News Bulletin number 122, entitled UN is Spawn of the Illuminati, and News Bulletin number 123, entitled CFR Completely Unmasked as Illuminati. Both are published by the Cinema Educational Guild, Post Office Box 46205, Hollywood, California. You can get them for 50 cents per copy by writing to that address. Those news bulletins reveal the names of the original founders of the Illuminati and the Americanized names of their descendants in the present CFR. Now I'll go back to the activities of the original Illuminati conspirators. As revealed in News Bulletin number 122, one branch of the Rothschild family had financed Napoleon. Another branch of the Rothschilds, both branches the real masterminds of the Illuminati, financed Britain, Germany, and the other nations in the Napoleonic Wars. Immediately after the Napoleonic Wars, the Illuminati assumed that all the nations were so destitute and so weary of wars that they'd be glad for any solution. So the Rothschild stooges set up what they called the Congress in Vienna, and at that meeting they tried to create the first League of Nations, their first attempted one world government, on the theory that all the crowned heads of the European governments were so deeply in debt to them that they would, willingly or unwillingly, serve as their stooges. But the Tsar of Russia caught the stench of the plot and completely torpedoed it. The enraged Nathan Rothschild, then the head of that dynasty, vowed that someday he or his descendants would destroy the Tsar and his entire family. And his descendants did accomplish that very threat in 1917. At this point, bear in mind that the Illuminati was not set up to operate on a short-range basis. Normally, a conspirator of any type enters into a conspiracy with the expectation of achieving his objective during his own lifetime. But that was not the case with the Illuminati. True, they hope to accomplish their objective during their lifetime. But, paraphrasing, the show must go on, the Illuminati operates on the very long-range basis. Whether it will take scores of years or even centuries, they have dedicated their descendants to keep the plot boiling until they hope the conspiracy is achieved. Now let's go back to the birth of the Illuminati. Adam Weishaupt was a Jesuit-trained professor of canon law, teaching in Ingolstadt University when he defected from Christianity to embrace the Luciferian conspiracy. It was in 1770 that the professional moneylenders, the then recently organized House of Rothschild, retained him to revise and modernize the age-old protocols of Zionism, which from the outset was designed to give the synagogue of Satan, so named by Jesus Christ, ultimate world domination, so they could impose the Luciferian ideology upon what would remain of the human race after the final social cataclysm by use of satanic despotism. Weishaupt completed his task May 1st, 1776. Now you know why May 1 is the great day with all communist nations to this very day. That was the day, May 1, 1776, that Weishaupt completed his plan and officially organized the Illuminati to put the plan into execution. That plan required the destruction of all existing governments and religions. That objective was to be reached by dividing the masses of people whom he, Weishaupt, termed Goyim, or human cattle, into opposing camps in ever-increasing numbers on political, social, economic, and other issues, the very conditions we have in our country today. The opposing sides were then to be armed and incidents provided which would cause them to fight and weaken themselves and gradually destroy national governments and religious institutions. Again, I say, the very conditions in the world today. And at this point, let me stress a prime feature of the Illuminati plans. When and if their blueprint for world control, the protocols of the elders of Zion, is discovered and exposed, they would wipe all the Jews off the face of the earth in order to divert suspicions from themselves. If you think this is far-fetched, bear in mind that they permitted Hitler, a liberal socialist himself, who was financed by Krupp, Kennedy, the Warburgs, and the Rothschilds, to incinerate 600,000 Jews. Now, just why did the conspirators choose the word Illuminati for their satanic organization? Weishaupt himself said that the word is derived from Lucifer and means holders of the light, using the lie that his objective was to bring about a one-world government to enable those with mental ability to govern the world and prevent all wars in the future. In short, using the word peace on earth as his bait, exactly as that same bait, peace, was used by the 1945 conspirators to foist the United Nations on us. Weishaupt, financed, I repeat, by the Rothschilds, recruited some 2,000 paid followers. These included the most intelligent men in the fields of arts and letters, education, the sciences, finance, and industry. He then established lodges of the Grand Orient, Masonic lodges, to be their secret headquarters. And I again repeat that in all of this, he was acting under orders from the House of Rothschild. The main features of the Weishaupt plan of operation required his Illuminati to do the following things to help them to accomplish their purpose. Number one, use monetary and sex bribery to obtain control of men already in high places in the various levels of all governments and other fields of endeavor. Once influential persons had fallen for the lies, deceits, and temptations of the Illuminati, they were to be held in bondage by application of political and other forms of blackmail, threats of financial ruin, public exposure and physical harm, even death, to themselves and loved members of their families. Do you realize how many present top officials in our federal government in Washington are controlled in just that way by the CFR? Do you realize how many homosexuals in our State Department, the Pentagon, all federal agencies, even in the White House, are controlled that way? Number two, Illuminati and the faculties of colleges and universities were to cultivate students possessing exceptional mental ability belonging to well-bred families with international leanings and recommend them for special training in internationalism. Such training was to be provided by granting scholarships to those selected by the Illuminists. That gives you an idea what a Rhodes Scholarship means. It means indoctrination into accepting the idea that only a one-world government can put an end to recurring wars and strife. That's how the United Nations was sold to the American people. One of the most notable Rhodes Scholars we have in our country is Senator William J. Fulbright, sometimes referred to as Half-Bright. His entire voting record spells Illuminati. All such scholars were to be first persuaded and then convinced that men of special talent and brains have the right to rule those less gifted on the ground that the masses don't know what is best for them physically, mentally, and spiritually. In addition to the Rhodes and similar scholarships, today there are 3 special Illuminati schools located in Gordonstown in Scotland, Salem in Germany, and Anavrita in Greece. These 3 are known ones, but there are others that are kept undercover. Prince Philip, the husband of Britain's Queen Elizabeth, was educated at Gordonstown at the instigation of Lord Louis Mountbatten, his uncle, a Rothschild relative, who became Britain's admiral of the fleet after World War II ended. Number 3, all influential people trapped into coming under the control of the Illuminati, plus the students who had been specially educated and trained, were to be used as agents and placed behind the scenes of all governments as experts and specialists, so they would advise the top executives to adopt policies which would, in the long run, serve the secret plans of the Illuminati one-world conspiracy and bring about the destruction of the governments and religions they were elected or appointed to serve. Do you know how many such men operate in our government at this very time? Rusk, McNamara, Hubert Humphrey, Fulbright, Kuchel, and go on and on and on. Number 4, perhaps the most vital directive in Weishaupt's plan was to obtain absolute control of the press, at that time the only mass communications media, to distribute information to the public, so that all news and information could be slanted, so that the masses could be convinced that a one-world government is the only solution to our many and varied problems. Now do you know who owns and controls our mass communications media? I'll tell you, practically all the movie lots in Hollywood is owned by the Lehmans, Kuhn Loeb and Company, Goldman Sachs, and other internationalist bankers, All the national radio and TV channels in the nation are owned and controlled by those same internationalist bankers. The same is true of every chain of metropolitan newspapers and magazines, also of the press wire services, such as Associated Press, United Press International, etc. The supposed heads of all those media are merely the fronts for the internationalist bankers, who in turn compose the hierarchy of the CFR, today's Illuminati in America. Now can you understand why the Pentagon's press agent Sylvester so brazenly proclaimed that the government has the right to lie to the people? What he really meant was that our CFR-controlled government had the power to lie to and be believed by the brainwashed American people. And let's again go back to the first days of the Illuminati. Because Britain and France were the two greatest world powers in the late years of the 18th century, Weishaupt ordered the Illuminati to foment the colonial wars, including our Revolutionary War, to weaken the British Empire and organize the French Revolution to destroy the French Empire. He scheduled the French Revolution to start in 1789. However, in 1784, a true act of God placed the Bavarian government in possession of evidence which proved the existence of the Illuminati, and that evidence could have saved France if they, the French government, hadn't refused to believe it. Here is how that act of God happened. It was in 1874 that Weishaupt issued his orders for the French Revolution. A German writer named Zwack put it into book form. It contained the entire Illuminati story and Weishaupt's plans. A copy of this book was sent to the Illuminists in France, headed by Robespierre, whom Weishaupt had delegated to foment the French Revolution. The courier was struck and killed by lightning as he rode through Raleston on his way from Frankfurt to Paris. The police found the subversive documents on his body and turned them over to the proper authorities. After careful study of the plot, the Bavarian government ordered the police to raid Weishaupt's newly organized lodges of the Grand Orient and the homes of his most influential associates. All additional evidence thus discovered convinced the authorities the documents were genuine copies of the conspiracy by which the Illuminati planned to use wars and revolutions to bring about the establishment of a one-world government, the powers of which they, headed by the Rothschilds, intended to usurp as soon as it was established, exactly in line with the United Nations plot of today. In 1785, the Bavarian government outlawed the Illuminati and closed the lodges of the Grand Orient. In 1786, they published all the details of the conspiracy. The English title of that publication is The Original Writings of the Order and Sect of the Illuminati. Copies of the entire conspiracy were sent to all the heads of church and state in Europe. But the power of the Illuminati, which was actually the power of the Rothschilds, was so great that this warning was ignored. Nevertheless, Illuminati became a dirty word, and it went underground. At the same time, Weishaupt ordered Illuminists to infiltrate into the lodges of Blue Masonry and form their own secret societies within all secret societies. Only Masons who proved themselves internationalists and those whose conduct proved they had defected from God were initiated into the Illuminati. Thenceforth, the conspirators donned the cloak of philanthropy and humanitarianism to conceal their revolutionary and subversive activities. In order to infiltrate into Masonic lodges in Britain, Weishaupt invited John Robison over to Europe. Robison was a high-degree Mason in the Scottish Rite. He was a professor of natural philosophy at Edinburgh University and secretary of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. Robeson did not fall for the lie that the objective of the Illuminati was to create a benevolent dictatorship, but he kept his reactions to himself so well that he was entrusted with a copy of Weishaupt's revised conspiracy for study and safekeeping. Anyway, because the heads of state and church in France were deluded into ignoring the warnings given them, the revolution broke out in 1789 as scheduled by Weishaupt. In order to alert other governments to their danger, in 1798 Robeson published a book entitled Proof of a Conspiracy to Destroy All Governments and Religions. But his warnings were ignored, exactly as our American people have been ignoring all warnings about the United Nations and the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR. Now here is something that will stun and very likely outrage many who hear this. But there is documentary proof that our own Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton became students of Weishaupt's. Jefferson was one of Weishaupt's strongest defenders when he was outlawed by his government. And it was Jefferson who infiltrated the Illuminati into the then newly organized lodges of the Scottish Rite in New England. Here is the proof. In 1789, John Robeson warned all Masonic leaders in America that the Illuminati had infiltrated into their lodges. And on July 19, 1789, David Papin, president of Harvard University, issued the same warning to the graduating class and lectured them on the influence Illuminism was acquiring on American politics and religion. And to top it off, John Quincy Adams, who had organized the New England Masonic lodges, issued his warnings. He wrote 3 letters to Colonel William L. Stone, a top Mason, in which he exposed how Jefferson was using Masonic lodges for subversive, Illuministic purposes. Those 3 letters are at this very time in Rittenberg Square Library in Philadelphia. In short, Jefferson, founder of the Democratic Party, was a member of the Illuminati, which at least partly accounts for the condition of the party at this time. And through infiltrations of the Republican Party, we have exactly nothing of loyal Americanism today. That disastrous rebuff at the Congress at Vienna, created by the Tsar of Russia, did not by any means destroy the Illuminati conspiracy. It merely forced them to adopt a new strategy. Realizing that the one world idea was, for the moment, killed, the Rothschilds decided that to keep the plot alive, they'd have to do it by heightening their control of the money systems of the European nations. Earlier, by a ruse, the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo had been falsified. Rothschild had spread a story that Napoleon had won that battle. That had precipitated a terrific panic on the stock market in England. All stocks had plummeted down to practically zero, and Nathan Rothschild bought all the stocks for virtually a penny on its dollar values. That gave him complete control of the economy of Britain and virtually of all Europe. So immediately after that Congress in Vienna had boomeranged, Rothschild forced Britain to set up a new Bank of England, which he absolutely controlled, exactly as later, through Jacob Schiff, he engineered our own Federal Reserve Act, which gave the House of Rothschild a secret control of the economy in the United States. But now for a moment, let's dwell on the activities of the Illuminati in the United States. In 1826, one Captain William Morgan decided it was his duty to inform all Masons and the general public what the full truth was regarding the Illuminati, their secret plans and intended objectives. Also reveal the identities of the masterminds of the conspiracy. The Illuminati promptly tried Morgan in absentia and convicted him of treason. They ordered one Richard Howard, an English Illuminist, to carry out their sentence of execution as a traitor. Morgan was warned and he tried to escape to Canada, but Howard caught up with him near the border, near the Niagara Gorge to be exact, where he murdered him. This was verified in a sworn statement made in New York by one Avery Allen to the effect that he heard Howard render his report of the execution to a meeting of Knights Templars in St. John's Hall, New York. He also told how arrangements had been made to ship Howard back to England. That Allen affidavit is on record in New York City archives. Very few Masons and very few of the general public know that general disapproval over that incident of murder caused approximately half of all the Masons in the northern jurisdiction of the United States to secede. Copies of the minutes of the meeting held to discuss that matter are still in existence in safe hands, and that all that secrecy emphasizes the power of the masterminds of the Illuminati to prevent such terrible events of history from being taught in our schools. In the early 1850s, the Illuminati held a secret meeting in New York, which was addressed by a British Illuminist named Wright. Those in attendance were told that the Illuminati was organizing to unite the nihilist and atheist groups with all other subversive groups into an international to be known as communists. That was when the word communist first came into being, and it was intended to be the supreme weapon and scare word to terrify the whole world and drive the terrorized peoples into the Illuminati one world scheme. This scheme, communism, was to be used to enable the Illuminati to foment future wars and revolutions. Clinton Roosevelt, a direct ancestor of Franklin Roosevelt, Horace Greeley and Charles Dana, foremost newspaper publishers of that time, were appointed to head a committee to raise funds for the new venture. Of course, most of the funds were provided by the Rothschilds. And this fund was used to finance Karl Marx and Engels when they wrote Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto in Soho, England. And this clearly reveals that communism is not a so-called ideology, but a secret weapon, a bogeyman word to serve the purpose of the Illuminati. Weishaupt died in 1830, but prior to his death he prepared a revised version of the age-old conspiracy, the Illuminati, which under various aliases was to organize, finance, direct, and control all international organizations and groups by working their agents into executive positions at the top. In the United States, we have Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, Jack Kennedy, Johnson, Rusk, McNamara, Fulbright, etc. as prime examples. In addition, while Karl Marx was writing the Communist Manifesto under the direction of one group of Illuminists, Professor Karl Ritter of Frankfurt University was writing the antithesis under direction of another group. The idea was that those who direct the overall conspiracy could use the differences in those two so-called ideologies to enable them to divide larger and larger members of the human race into opposing camps so that they could be armed and then brainwashed into fighting and destroying each other. And particularly to destroy all political and religious institutions. The work Ritter started was continued after his death and completed by the German so-called philosopher Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche, who founded Nietzscheism. This Nietzscheism was later developed into fascism and then into Nazism and was used to foment World Wars I and II. In 1834, the Italian revolutionary leader Giuseppe Mazzini was selected by the Illuminati to direct their revolutionary program throughout the world. He served in that capacity until he died in 1872. But some years before he died, Mazzini had enticed an American general named Albert Pike into the Illuminati. Pike was fascinated by the idea of a one-world government, and ultimately he became the head of this Luciferian conspiracy. Between 1859 and 1871, he, Pike, worked out a military blueprint for 3 world wars and various revolutions throughout the world, which he considered would forward the conspiracy to its final stage in the 20th century. Again, I remind that these conspirators were never concerned with immediate success. They always operated on a long-range view. Pike did most of his work in his home in Little Rock, Arkansas. But a few years later, when the Illuminati's lodges of the Grand Orient became suspect and repudiated because of Mazzini's revolutionary activities in Europe, Pike organized what he called the New and Reformed Palladian Rite. He set up 3 supreme councils, one in Charleston, South Carolina, one in Rome, Italy, and the 3rd in Berlin, Germany. He had Mazzini establish 23 subordinate councils in strategic locations throughout the world. These have been the secret headquarters of the world revolutionary movement ever since. Long before Marconi invented radio, the scientists in the Illuminati had found the means for Pike and the heads of his councils to communicate secretly. It was the discovery of that secret that enabled intelligence officers to understand how apparently unrelated incidents, one such as the assassination of an Austrian prince at Sarajevo, took place simultaneously throughout the world, which developed into a war or a revolution. Pike's plan was as simple as it has proved effective. It called for communism, Nazism, political Zionism, and other international movements be organized and used to foment 3 global world wars and at least 2 major revolutions. The First World War was to be fought so as to enable the Illuminati to destroy Tsarism in Russia, as vowed by Rothschild after the Tsar had torpedoed his scheme at the Congress in Vienna, and to transform Russia into a stronghold of atheistic communism. The differences stirred up by agents of the Illuminati between the British and German empires were to be used to foment this war. After the war would be ended, communism was to be built up and used to destroy other governments and weaken religions. World War II, when and if necessary, was to be fomented by using the controversies between fascists and political Zionists. And here let it be noted that Hitler was financed by Krupp, the Warburgs, the Rothschilds, and other internationalist bankers, and that the slaughter of the supposed 600,000 Jews by Hitler didn't bother the Jewish internationalist bankers at all. That slaughter was necessary in order to create worldwide hatred of the German people and thus bring about the war against them. In short, this Second World War was to be fought to destroy Nazism and to increase the power of political Zionism so that the State of Israel could be established in Palestine. During this World War II, international communism was to be built up until it equaled in strength that of united Christendom. When it reached that point, it was to be contained and kept in check until required for the final social cataclysm. As we know now, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin put that exact policy into effect, and Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson continued that same exact policy. World War III is to be fomented by using the so-called controversies, the agents of the Illuminati, operating under whatever new name, are now stirring up between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Muslim world. That war is to be directed in such a manner that all of Islam and political Zionism, Israel, will destroy each other, while at the same time the remaining nations, once more divided on this issue, will be forced to fight themselves into a state of complete exhaustion, physically, mentally, spiritually, and economically. Now, can any thinking person doubt that the intrigue now going on in the Near, Middle, and Far East is designed to accomplish that satanic objective? Pike himself foretold all this in a statement he made to Mazzini on August 15, 1871. Pike stated that after World War III is ended, those who will inspire to undisputed world domination will provoke the greatest social cataclysm the world has ever known. Quoting his own words, taken from the letter he wrote to Mazzini, and which letter is now catalogued in the British Museum in London, England, he said, "We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a great social cataclysm which in all its horror will show clearly to all nations the effect of absolute atheism, the origin of savagery and of most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere the people forced to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitudes disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will be from that moment on without direction and leadership, and anxious for an ideal but without knowledge where to send its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out into public view, a manifestation which will result from a general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time." When Mazzini died in 1872, Pike made another Italian revolutionary leader named Adrian Lemmi his successor. Lemmi, in turn, was succeeded by Lenin and Trotsky, then by Stalin. The revolutionary activities of all those men were financed by British, French, German, and American international bankers, all of them dominated by the House of Rothschild. We are supposed to believe that the international bankers of today, like the money changers of Christ's day, are only the tools or agents of the great conspiracy, but actually they are the masterminds behind all of it. While the general public has been brainwashed by all the mass communications media into believing that communism is a movement of the so-called workers, the actual fact is that both British and American intelligence officers have authentic documentary evidence that international liberals operating through their international banking houses, particularly the House of Rothschild, have financed both sides in every war and revolution since 1776. Those who today comprise the conspiracy, the CFR in the United States, direct our governments, whom they hold in usury through such methods as the Federal Reserve System in America, to fight wars such as Vietnam, created by the United Nations, so as to further Pike's Illuminati plans to bring the world to that stage of the conspiracy when atheistic communism and the whole of Christianity can be forced into an all-out Third World War within each remaining nation, as well as on an international scale. The headquarters of the great conspiracy in the late 1700s was in Frankfurt, Germany, where the House of Rothschild had been established by Mayer Anschelm, who adopted the Rothschild name and linked together other international financiers who had literally sold their souls to the devil. After the Bavarian government's exposure in 1786, the conspirators moved their headquarters to Switzerland, then to London. Since World War II, after Jacob Schiff, the Rothschilds' boy in America, died, the headquarters of the American branch has been in the Harold Pratt Building, New York, and the Rockefellers, originally protégés of Schiff, have taken over the manipulation of finances in America for the Illuminati. In the final phases of the conspiracy, the one world government will consist of the king dictator, head of the United Nations, the CFR, and a few billionaires, economists, and scientists who have proved their devotion to the great conspiracy. All others are to be integrated into a vast conglomeration of mongrelized humanity, actually slaves. Now let me show you how our federal government and the American people have been sucked into the one world takeover plot of the Illuminati great conspiracy. And always bear in mind that the United Nations was created to become the housing for that one world so-called liberal conspiracy. The real foundations of the plot for the takeover of the United States were laid during the period of our Civil War. Not that Weishaupt and the earlier masterminds had ever overlooked the New World. As I have previously indicated, Weishaupt had his agents planted over here as far back as the Revolutionary War. But George Washington was more than a match for them. It was during the Civil War that the conspirators launched their first concrete efforts. We know that Judah Benjamin, chief advisor of Jefferson Davis, was a Rothschild agent. We also know that there were Rothschild agents planted in Abraham Lincoln's cabinet who tried to sell him into a financial dealing with the House of Rothschild. But old Abe saw through the scheme and bluntly rejected it, thereby incurring the undying enmity of the Rothschilds, exactly as the Russian Tsar did when he torpedoed their first League of Nations at the Congress in Vienna. Investigation of the assassination of Lincoln revealed that the assassin, Booth, was a member of a secret conspiratorial group. Because there were a number of highly important government officials involved, the name of the group was never revealed, and it became a mystery, exactly as the assassination of Jack Kennedy still is a mystery. But I am sure it will not for long remain a mystery. Anyway, the ending of the Civil War destroyed, temporarily, all chances of the House of Rothschild to get a clutch on our money system, such as they had acquired in Britain and other nations in Europe. I say temporarily because the Rothschilds and the masterminds of the conspiracy never quit. So they had to start from scratch, but they lost no time in getting started. Shortly after the Civil War, a young immigrant who called himself Jacob H. Schiff arrived in New York. Jacob was a young man with a mission for the House of Rothschild. Jacob was the son of a rabbi, born in one of Rothschild's houses in Frankfurt, Germany. I won't go deeply into his background. The important point is that Rothschild recognized in him not only a potential money wizard, but more important, he also saw the latent Machiavellian qualities in Jacob that could, as it did, make him an invaluable functionary in the great one-world conspiracy. After a comparatively brief training period in the Rothschilds' London bank, Jacob left for America with instructions to buy into a banking house, which was to be the springboard to acquire control of the money system of the United States. Actually, Jacob came here to carry out 4 specific assignments. Number 1, and most important, was to acquire control of America's money system. Number 2, find desirable men who, for a price, would be willing to serve as stooges for the great conspiracy and promote them into high places in our federal government, our Congress, in the U.S. Supreme Court, and all federal agencies. Number 3, create minority group strife throughout the nations, particularly between whites and blacks. Number 4, create a movement to destroy religion in the United States, but Christianity to be the chief target. Earlier, I stated that Jacob Schiff came to America with orders by Rothschild to carry out 4 specific directives. The first and most important one was to get control of the United States money system. Let's trace Schiff's step to accomplish that directive. As a first step, he had to buy into a banking house, but it had to be the kind of a house that he could absolutely control and mold for that primary objective of entrapping our U.S. money system. After carefully scouting around, Jacob bought a partnership in a firm that called itself Kuhn and Loeb. Like Schiff, Kuhn and Loeb were immigrants from German Jewish ghettos. They came to the United States in the mid-1840s. Both started their business careers as itinerant pack peddlers. In the early 1850s, they pooled their interests and set up a merchandising store in Lafayette, Indiana, under the firm name of Kuhn and Loeb, servicing the covered wagon settlers on their way west. In the years that followed, they set up similar stores in Cincinnati and St. Louis. Then they added pawnbroking to their merchandising pursuits. From that to money lending was a short and quick step. By the time Schiff arrived on the scene, Kuhn and Loeb was a well-known private banking firm, and this is the firm Jacob bought into. Shortly after he became a partner in Kuhn and Loeb, Schiff married Loeb's daughter, Teresa. Then he bought out Kuhn's interests and moved the firm to New York, and Kuhn and Loeb became Kuhn, Loeb and Company, international bankers with Jacob Schiff, agent of the Rothschilds, ostensibly the sole owner. And throughout his career, this blend of Judas and Machiavelli, the first hierarch of the Illuminati, great conspiracy in America, posed as a generous philanthropist and a man of great holiness, the cover-up policy set forth by the Illuminati. As I have stated, the first great step of the conspiracy was to be the entrapment of our money system. To achieve that objective, Schiff had to get full cooperation of the then big banker elements in America, and that was easier said than done. Even in those years, Wall Street was the heart of the American money mart, and J.P. Morgan was its dictator. Next in line were the Drexels and the Biddles in Philadelphia. All the other financiers, big and little, danced to the music of those 3 houses, but particularly to that of Morgan. All of those 3 were proud, haughty, arrogant potentates. For the first few years, they viewed the little bewhiskered man from the German ghettos with utter contempt. But Jacob knew how to overcome that. He threw a few Rothschild bones to them, said bones being distribution in America of desirable European stock and bond issues. Then he discovered he had a still more potent weapon in his hands in the following. It was in the decades following our Civil War that our industries began to burgeon. We had great railroads to build. The oil, mining, steel, textile industries were bursting out of their swaddling clothes. All that called for vast financing. Much of that financing had to come from abroad. That meant the House of Rothschild. And that was when Schiff came into his own. He played a very crafty game. He became the patron saint of John D. Rockefeller, Edward R. Harriman, and Andrew Carnegie. He financed the Standard Oil Company for Rocky, the railroad empire for Harriman, and the steel empire for Carnegie. But instead of hogging all the other industries for Kuhn, Loeb and Company, he opened the doors of the House of Rothschild to Morgan, Biddle, and Drexel. In turn, Rothschild arranged the setting up of London, Paris, European, and other branches for those three, but always in partnerships with Rothschild subordinates. And Rothschild made it very clear to all those men that Schiff was to be the boss in New York. Thus, at the turn of the century, Schiff had a tight control of the entire banking fraternity on Wall Street, which by then, with Schiff's help, included Lehman Brothers, Goldman Sachs, and other internationalist banks, headed by men chosen by the Rothschilds. In short, that meant control of the nation's money powers, and he was then ready for the giant step, the entrapment of our national money system. Now, under our Constitution, all control of our money system is vested solely in our Congress. Schiff's next important step was to seduce our Congress to betray that constitutional edict by surrendering that control to the hierarchy of the Illuminati's great conspiracy. In order to legalize that surrender and thus make the people powerless to resist it, it would be necessary to have Congress enact special legislation. To accomplish that, Schiff would have to infiltrate stooges into both houses of Congress, stooges powerful enough to railroad Congress into passing such legislation. Equally, or even more important, he would have to plant a stooge in the White House, a president without integrity and without scruples,